Okay, so let's start on the TagUI maintainer training. So I'll be covering through the TagUI architecture more for, let's say, if you are going to maintain the software. So in this case, will be for Ruth and Kelly to know more about the behind the scenes of TagUI. But this is also relevant for any user who want to make a fork of TagUI and want to maintain the fork of TagUI on their own. And this is really something unique to open source because you download UiPath, you install Power Automate Desktop, there's a limit to how far you can customize it. You know, whatever range of option you can customize depends on how liberal the company is to let you customize. But you're talking about open source software like TagUI, the range is in theory infinite because every single thing that TagUI is built on is open source. You can even go down to the level of what is the error message that shows up. You can go down to the level of what's the message that prints when you get a result. You can control everything as long as you are willing to make a fork of the tool and modify the code. And that itself is also there's a cost to it because it takes time for you to maintain that piece of code. And if you do a fork and TagUI gets updated, then you got to merge the new features that come into your fork. Either that or you can choose to ignore some of those features. That's also doable. Or you can get the latest version of TagUI and modify the changes you make directly to that new version of TagUI. That's also possible. But primarily, what I'll cover is more for the people maintaining it, to customize it, to debug or deep level troubleshooting. Yeah, so from GitHub TagUI homepage, I'll just zoom into the old homepage, which is more developer focused. So at the end of that, there's a architecture diagram. So TagUI, if you look at the programming languages, I think there used to be one part that shows the languages in the tool. I think it's no longer here. Here, there. So you look at TagUI languages, right? There actually all sorts of code inside. There's JavaScript, PHP, Shell, Python, a batch file, and C#. So why? How does this fit in? Okay, so if you look at the TagUI architecture, this is from version 5.1, but the overall architecture is roughly still the same. There isn't big architectural changes since version 5.11. That one was sometime back. It's a couple of years back, I think. Yeah, it's 5.1. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, so at the core of TagUI will be this tool called Phantomjs. It's a headless browser. Headless browser means a browser that doesn't have the web interface that you see. It's just a command line tool that actually runs a web browser. And 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, it's amazing because there's nothing like it. And it's very useful for people to do testing where they want to test web applications and whatever. So Phantomjs came into the picture, but it's just a browser. So it's still not that useful to do testing and automation. So comes a project called Casperjs, another open source project, which makes it easy for you to automate what you want to do. Because this itself is just a browser. Browser means you have the browser rendering engine, you have the JavaScript engine, you have the CSS, HTML engine, and so on to render the web page. But it's just that it doesn't render to the screen. It just render in the memory. And but as a browser itself, you can't do much with it. You got to write a lot of code to try to automate. Then you come Casperjs, where this is created by a guy in France called Nicolas. Yeah, this one created by a guy originally from Indonesia, but he has moved to Silicon Valley for many years already. So this was created by a guy in France. So Casperjs helps to make automating the headless browser easy by creating various code to do that. So instead of writing 10 lines of JavaScript code, raw JavaScript code to automate going to a web page, clicking on a button, in Casperjs, you can do it in one line, for example. So we make it very easy to navigate the headless browser. So these two projects are very popular in the Prime in their prime of their days. They became less popular when Chrome started to launch headless mode. I think it was 2017. Yeah, that's where this project become more on the it's called like archive and maintenance mode lah. Yeah, so far it's been working, but yeah, who knows in the future there may be a certain version of Windows or Mac that doesn't work with this. Then probably the maintainer has to recompile a new version. But so far for the last few years, it's relatively stagnant, and I don't. Other than for one Mac update, right? I haven't changed the binary for these two tools for the last few years. Yeah, the Mac update is very updated because there's some change in the OpenSSL cert. But other than that, it's quite stable, these two components. And it's important when you are building an open source tool to use components that are relatively stable. Stable means that they don't have a lot of bugs. They don't keep changing and improving. I mean, if you're using a component that's keep improving, right, that means you haven't reached the stable state yet. Right? You haven't reached the ideal functionality it wants to be at yet. So maybe that's not the right component to use, unless you're trying to build something really cutting edge that you no choice have to use that. Otherwise, using something that's a stable, mature, tried and tested, not changing too much is usually a better option to use as a component of what you want to build. Yeah. So come into the picture will be TagUI, where instead of, let's say, 10 lines of Casperjs code, JavaScript, but also, it'll be one line of TagUI code. Let's say I say click login button, for example. So that one line of login button will be converted to 10 lines of Casperjs code and converted to 10 lines of Phantomjs code. So essentially that one line of TagUI code becomes maybe 100 lines of Phantomjs JavaScript code and automate it to run. And that was before Chrome headless entered the picture. But after Chrome headless entered the picture, I created the Chrome automation engine to control Chrome through the WebSocket backend. So I wrote that from scratch because I don't want to use any intermediate library like whether it's a Node.js library like Selenium or other Python library. This is an important integration. So I think it's important to own that integration by writing all the code needed to automate from scratch. So we are not held hostage by any dependency. Whether there's a bug, whether there's a need to iterate fast, we can fully control the pace. Yeah. So that was the integration for Chrome. Phantomjs is still available today. So if you run with no browser today option, you are actually running Phantomjs. It's just that you don't see the browser, that's all. You still can serve web page and read data and value, but chances are you're not going to get the expected result you want because Phantomjs is quite a dated browser, and the JavaScript engine is not the latest. So when you visit modern website, chances are if you visit enough website, you're gonna hit into a situation where a page is not rendering the way you expected. XPath you're looking for is not available because it's rendering a page differently than it is if you are using Chrome. Yeah. So because of that, I strongly don't recommend users to run the no browser mode on the web automation. You can still try. It's a memory efficient compared to running Chrome, but in terms of accuracy, it's definitely far from using a Chrome browser because this is 2022. So when anyone launch a web app, it will be primarily testing to work on Chrome, but nobody does testing on Phantomjs anymore. Relatively fewer people. So because of that, right, whatever application that you use run a website, the best source of truth for the accurate rendering and showing the result, showing the HTML DOM is Chrome, yeah, or at least Chromium browser, which comes in other flavors like Brave browser, like Microsoft Edge as well. So this is the Chrome integration. Then there's also a hidden path to go to Firefox through the Sliver.js. But the catch is you need a version 59 for Firefox, which you can Google and download version 59 for Firefox, and then the option is still hidden within TagUI. You say TagUI something with a dash Firefox, it will automate on the Firefox browser version 59. Again, not recommended, because if you're using an old browser, chances are this has been 59 is like a couple of years old already. Chances are it might not work accurately with modern websites, the latest website. So usually I recommend just go straight for Chrome. Anyway, this is for RPA automation, so it's not really for test automation. You don't really need to test on all kinds of browsers. On Chrome or Edge should suffice. In Microsoft Internet Explorer, they are actually reaching end of life, so they're actually encouraging different app developer to migrate to Microsoft Edge. Yeah, and that will take some time. But in the meantime, Microsoft Edge has a compatibility mode to run the IE engine inside. Yeah, but TagUI cannot automate the IE engine. Yeah, it's a different automation architecture altogether from Chromium. So it cannot automate through the back end, but you can still automate through the front end through computer vision and keyboard shortcuts and mouse automation. But that's about it. You can't get as good automation control as you would with Chrome. Yeah. Then comes into the picture to be the desktop app. So, TagUI is gradually add new features. So I think it's 2017, sometime in the mid 2017, I added the integration for Schooly. So Schooly has been a critical component of TagUI today, because through this Schooly X engine, it's actually an MIT computer science lab project that was a spin-off and now maintained by a guy in Germany. So through this Schooly X engine, you can do things like computer vision, OCR, desktop automation, and mouse automation. So that's very important, and it gives TagUI today ability to automate more broadly than just a website. Yeah. So this is a critical component, but it is optional. Optional in the sense that if you are not automating a desktop app, you don't actually need to use it or run it or install the open JDK that's required to run it. So it's purely optional. Yeah. Then there's also direct integration to R and Python. These are the two languages for machine learning today. Python is more popular now, but R is still being used by data scientists. So in your TagUI workflow, you can run R and Python code quite seamlessly. Yeah, relatively seamlessly. There's still some overhead because you're trying to control two programming languages variables in the same file. So there will still be overhead. Yeah, but it's pretty minimal. Yeah. So there's also Chrome extension. It's quite dated already. We haven't really updated Chrome extension for a while. Maybe down the road, a good roadmap would be to create a better version of the inspector recorder. Yeah, that can do it without even having a Chrome extension. Yeah, I think that's should be possible. Then you have the inputs that's coming in, whether it's workflow file or you can point a URL. So for TagUI, you can just TagUI followed by a URL to a tag file. You will automatically download and run that file. Yeah, provided there's internet access. Yeah. So that will be the architecture of TagUI. So any questions?
No.
Can okay. So next one I'll do is we go and trace the code to understand what happens when we run something. So let's do something very simple. So let's do something, say, just go to Google homepage, for example. So what happens when we do TagUI demo tag? Okay. I'm using a Mac, but the same backend process will also happen for Windows. So when we run one line, just go to Google homepage. It just load the browser, go to Google homepage, then it quits, finish. Okay. Now there's no artifacts remaining here because I didn't enable the logging. So right now I will do the same thing, but I create a TagUI logging file at the source folder. When that happens, you'll see all the intermediate files for running the demo. Yeah, this also in the documentation under there's a section for it, advanced topics. Yeah. So now it's the same thing, except that the remnant intermediate files will be there. So there's a JS file, there's a log file, there's a raw file, and there's a tag file, which is a source file you have. So why is there a raw file? It's there because let's say you call multiple TagUI subflow, right? And what happens is TagUI will create a new version of the tag file called a raw file, which contains all the code for the subflows. Let's say you call many subflow, then the subflow is like 10, 20 lines. In the end, this one will be 15 plus 10, 20 lines. And then you call the translation of this human language file. You see, it's also one line here to a JavaScript file. You see, the size is much larger already because there's a lot of supporting functions and logic behind. Okay, and then you have a log file, which is the output of what was done just now. Okay, so let's look at the generated JavaScript file. Okay, so there's various configuration options, various setup and inputs, various default parameters, various supporting functions. And then you zoom out to the end, you see the actual code that's generated from the www.google.com. So when you get the www.google.com in your TagUI script, that line get translated to this series of code. So you go to a bank page, then you go to set the default download location to the place where the flow file is. Then you set the instruction to go to that page. Then you wait for 1 second. Then you get the title of the page, and then you show it to say, hey, you are at that page already. Things like this are all built into TagUI. Why you need to wait 1 second? Because if you straight away query on the page title, right, you will not get anything. The page is still loading. So you need to wait a bit of time for the page to load, then you can get the page title. So all this already built in. Same with other TagUI steps, like you want to click on something, it will, maybe the best way is to do something like that. So google.com, type Q as American talent, for example. Okay, so let's say we do something like that. Then we wait for 5 seconds. Then we take a snapshot to amtalent.png. Okay, let's say we do something like this. So now what I want to show is what's the effect of, instead of 1 line, we actually do 4 instructions. So what happens? Okay. So let's trace through this scenario, right? So we are back there. So let me view the file demo.js. Okay, now you see here. Let me try to move this down so we can compare. Okay, so the left file here is the original 1 line where you do a Google URL. This one, you have the same thing, but you notice that each line of TagUI instruction gets compiled into a series of lines of JavaScript code. So in this case, the line called type Q, right? You will do things like you show up on the screen. Then you will check whether the element has appeared. You keep checking for up to 10 seconds, and until it appeared. If it appeared within 10 seconds, you try to send a key to this element, and then set an enter key as well, because there was a code here to do an enter keystroke. Okay, so do an enter key, And after that, you see there's a built-in error handling. Within 10 seconds, if you cannot find the element, you throw an error, you say cannot find, and then you take a snapshot of the screen here. In the same way, if you try to do computer vision, visual automation, a click on something, if you cannot find, right, you take a snapshot, but not of the web browser, but the whole desktop screen. So all these are built in already. So that's why you don't have to write all the, here is like actually more than 10 lines of code because I combine multiple lines of code into one line. So you can imagine here, right, all this actually, your one line here gets compiled to maybe 100 lines of JavaScript code to send to the Phantomjs JavaScript engine. I think it's based on ES5, the JavaScript engine. It's a couple of versions behind the latest JavaScript definition, but it still works lah. Yeah, it's largely usable for the use cases our users have. So you have things like you do a wait 5 seconds, that will be compiled into this. You show wait 5 seconds and this way. Then you do a wait. You do things like take a snapshot, then you send the instruction to take a snapshot, for example. Then at the end, some cleaning up, and then you quit and show the result, how much time you took for the automation. So this would be the example of flow. Then maybe one question as I run through is you're thinking, what's this TEcho? So the TEcho is used when here. The primary reason why there's a TEcho is because TagUI can run in quiet mode. So what I did is every time there's a need to print something to screen, I call TEcho instead of trying to print directly to the screen. So in this TEcho function, you check whether you're in quiet mode before you print to the screen. So if user is running in quiet mode, it will not print to screen. So it will be just silent and doesn't show any output just now at the prompt. Yeah, it will not show any single line of this. It will just be blank. Yeah. And it's also useful with these designs because when you're running a workflow halfway, let's say you have a part where you have a key in the user password or what. So you might want to set quiet mode equals to true so that it doesn't print all this sensitive info to the screen. And after the user enter password completes, right, you just set to false again. Then you'll show the output to screen again. This is also covered in the documentation, I think. Quiet mode. Yeah, here. So you can use this in your flow to set it to on and off as required rather than just run quiet entirely. Yeah, so it's very flexible. Okay, so now let's go back to the behind the scenes. What happens? Okay. Okay, so when I type the TagUI command on Linux and Mac, you will trigger this TagUI file, this one. Okay. This is for Linux, Mac. On Windows, you trigger the TagUI command file. So what you're seeing here is when you have an automation workflow, you type a TagUI command, the entry point will be here. This will be the entry point. Okay. Okay, so same for Windows, entry point is here. Yeah, this is quite the standard lah. For CLI tool, you have to design such that if user never give any input, you show some help info or like the version number, like how to use it, the sum of the options. So these are standard. So that's the first part of the logic. So I will, let me see. The logic for the Windows and the Mac is the same, except that on the Mac is and the Linux one is written in Bash scripting language, and for the Windows one is written in Windows Batch scripting language. Yeah, so I think maybe for the sake of the primary use case, most of our users are on Windows, so I just run through how the Windows one work. Yeah, so it does certain things like check whether it's online URL, and there's certain syntax to check whether there's a URL given, and if it is, it will go and download the file, and then after downloading a copy of the file, you set that the file name as the first parameter to automate that file. Then you check things like whether it's going to live mode. You know, TagUI live, if it is, right, you create a dummy file called live.tag and then run that file. Yeah, then these are all happening in sequence. This is not like a programming language where you define functions, then you call each other. No, it's all running linearly in sequence. So if you trace through the code, it's quite easy to understand how it's being executed. Yeah. But the part that's hard would be to understand the syntax for Windows batch file and Linux batch scripting. That one need to Google. Yeah, if you need to troubleshoot something, you need to Google. Yeah, I also learned this from scratch as I start to build it. I can show you. Then you see what I mean by I learned along the way. Okay, so let's say I look at the Mac version. So it's like 471 lines, right? Let's look at the very initial release of TagUI. Okay, alpha release. How do I, okay, see the version? Okay, so there's the very initial version of TagUI. It's like December 2016. So you look at the structure, the basic structure that defines the initial release is still here. You know, you have entry point, but I developed it on Mac at the start. It was only sometime in March 2017 that I added the Windows version. So it's only 6 lines, you know. So this 6 lines is the core of what TagUI does already. That's since the start. I call the TagUI pass to convert the human language to JavaScript code. Then I run Casperjs on the generated JavaScript file. That's all. Yeah, but this 6 lines, right, has now grown to 400, almost 500 lines, because along the way you add more and more features and more edge cases, more and more options. So things will become more yeah. Data table, object repository, all these things. Yeah. So, but this is the first version, and then the TagUI header. You know, you have the header file. It's just a pretty short file that define the header file, and then the footer. There will be a header and footer because the beginning part of the generated JavaScript code and the end part should be the same. Only the middle part, which is the instruction and step, that would be the one that's different. So for convenience, you have a header, you have a footer, which users can customize. You can customize to do things differently. Then you have a TagUI pass file where you convert the human language syntax into JavaScript code. So that's the first version, first working version. Yeah. Okay, then so over here, this is a newly added 7 months ago, 8 months ago, where there's an update option. Okay, go ahead, go and download the from GitHub repo and overwrite. Yeah, so you basically check whether there's a zip file, various checks essentially. And one is check already. You want to compare the version to check whether the version that you have is the same as the latest version in the GitHub. Yeah, so all these are batch file scripting syntax, which I think is an overkill if I ask you guys to learn now. But based on here, you can Google and you can find what all this means. Basically, batch file scripting is very hard, much harder than normal programming languages. Because, for example, right, you want to do simple thing like you want to check for some parameter and string within a file, right? You got to do some crazy stuff like a for loop syntax just to read that value out and get it into a variable. Yeah, it's it's not intuitive lah, in my view. Why you need a for loop just to do something so simple? But it is what it is. There's a lot of legacy constraints going on. So usually it's like that, when you have a workaround, the workaround will end up becoming the primary way of using something. And there's also little incentive to improve the language to do more, because it works already. The tendency is not to add more to complicate things lah. So that's why legacy reason, I think that's why till today is still the syntax to just do something like reading basically this tool line is just trying to read the version number of the TagUI file, which is trying to read the command file here, and as well as the command file downloaded from GitHub. Yeah. So after comparing the version, you say, are you using the latest? If you're latest, then you do TagUI update. Of course, you don't want to do anything, right? You're using the latest, and it's pretty fast. You see, after I type, quickly download and get a result. Not like take many years to sync. Yeah, and even the downloading is very fast. Fortunately, the overall file size for this repo is about 12 meg. Yeah, so the largest files will be some of the Microsoft Office source files and the documentation source files. The documentation source includes some MP4. That's why it brought up the size. Yeah. So, but it's so hard for me to put all this separate as a separate repo lah. Yeah. But an idea would be, let's say TagUI become a separate project, a separate GitHub organization, then it may make sense to store the documents as a separate repo. If you do that, then you actually decouple all this maybe 8 to 10 megabyte away. And then when user do a TagUI update, you just do a pull of a 2 meg file. That's much faster, for example. And then maybe the Microsoft Office stuff can be stored as a separate repo lah. Now it doesn't make sense because this is a AI Singapore GitHub organization. It doesn't make sense for 3-4 TagUI repo to flood the AI Singapore organization repo. It's just it will just clutter up the main organization. But if TagUI exists as its own organization, yes, then it makes sense to consider breaking up the documents away, breaking up the Office plugins as a separate project, so that it doesn't block up when user do a TagUI update. Yeah. But anyway, this is I would say it's a low return on investment, because it depends on context, right? Now it's 2022. So for a user to download a 12 megabyte file versus a 2 megabyte file, right? It's probably insignificant to the user's life. Like instead of taking 5 seconds to download or 10 seconds, you end up taking 1-2 seconds. So the additional 10 seconds is not a lot, of pain. Yeah, but anyway, it's just an idea. Yeah. To decouple, but the gain from the actual user benefit is not a lot. Yeah. Anyway, okay, let's go back here. So after you do TagUI update, all these commands like curl, right, is also packaged together with TagUI, the Windows version. For Linux and Mac, it comes with it, so there's no need to package. So if you look at the TagUI zip, after you download, under the source folder, there's a UNX folder. That's all the Linux-based commands, the Windows version of those Linux-based commands. Yeah. So I store a copy of that so that it's easy to do some of the things that's done on the bash file on the Mac. Yeah. If you ask me, I think Linux and bash scripting is much more powerful than Windows bash scripting. And I think a lot of people agree with that. But Microsoft introduced PowerShell, which is taking that type of scripting to another higher level notch. So I think a lot of people would think that the PowerShell is more powerful than Linux and bash scripting. And I agree with them too. Yeah. So anyway, so this one is the downloading and do all the stuff. The other downloading, you tar to extract out. So sometimes every once in a while, I think I encountered this once or twice. The user say, hey, got a error say tar command not found, and that's because their version of Windows somehow the tar is not in. Yeah, but otherwise by right from Windows 7 onwards, I think tar is a standard command in Windows. Okay, so after you download the zip, you extract it lor. Then you see here is like actually quite a number of lines of code. Yeah, extract already, then you replace it, then you remove the zip file, blah blah blah. Yeah. Then things like some sanity check whether the flow file exists, if not, blah blah blah. Then check the parameters. There's a baseline option where if you run TagUI with the baseline option, it will store a copy of the run result to a baseline folder. Yeah, I think it's no longer a public option. Yeah.
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, I like to trim away options ruthlessly because it reduces the cognitive load for the user. Yeah, so options like this is good for testing, but in most RPA use case may not be so useful. So I trim it away. Yeah.
Okay, what is the baseline again?
Baseline option. So when you run TagUI with baseline option, for example, I run a Chrome example, it will run the same thing, but you create a folder called baseline and store the run result there.
That means whatever the output is it?
Yeah, and the reason for that is you do it's like you try to do a snapshot in time at present, so that in the future you can compare back the two run result.
Okay.
Yeah, but if today you use the report option, you get a similar effect also, but you also store a copy of the log. Yeah, so this was before the report option was actually introduced. The baseline option will keep overwriting.
Okay, the baseline will keep overwriting, but the
report won't. Report will keep each run of the same file, you will store as a separate file with a running counter. Yeah, so I would think report option is more powerful and more robust than baseline option, but that's why I decided to retire it.
Okay.
So, and then you'll be thinking, why not remove it? The reason is because we can't just simply remove something that's added, because you don't know how many users actually use this option, right? Imagine their horror where they take you up this suddenly, their created RPA workflow suddenly don't work, I think it's a nightmare. I think it's important to respect the time that your existing users put in to build something using your tool and the assets and resource they create, and not screw them up by suddenly giving them a surprise to break their code with a new release. I think that's very bad and not the right etiquette for software releases. Yeah, so I will not remove this because of that lah. And there'll be cost. Yes, there'll be cost. There may be maybe 30 more lines of this code that's redundant, but this 30 lines of code to a modern CPU, right, has negligible overheads. Then 30 lines of code in terms of storage is like maybe 300 more bytes. In terms of memory and execution, it has maybe 0.1. It will take 1 more millisecond to pass through this series of code. So it has negligible overhead. But if we remove it, it might impact somebody's work and deliverable, suddenly. So because of that, the trade-off would be better not to remove.
Okay.
But we still don't want to confuse user and encourage them to use an obsolete option. That's why documentation in the README guide don't have this anymore. You type TagUI Command also don't have this anymore. Yeah. Then if it's a baseline option, you create a folder called baseline to store everything basically. Then here, you have some blocks of code to determine where Casperjs is installed, where Phantomjs is installed. So you will first check whether you install them through Node.js. There's an npm package for installing TagUI in the past, but that also deprecated. We are not maintaining it anymore. There's a there's a one, let's say for Windows and Mac, the dependency are actually packaged together with TagUI zip file, the Casperjs. So it's trying to check whether it's there and so on. Yeah. So let's see. Then there's also for Mac and Linux, you also will check at the start whether there's a symbolic link. That means user install manually on their own. Yeah. But this is not something applicable to Windows, so this block is not here. Okay. Primarily, what most users will experience will be this pathway. Yeah. They'll this one. They'll find a match on the package dependency on Windows and Mac, and then they'll run. Yeah. Okay. Then here, check for various options like deploy option. If it's a deploy option, set it to true so that you do something special at the end. Okay. You do something like it's very mundane work because you got to run through option 1 to 10 using this repetitive code. Yeah. Yeah, but it's the syntax lah for the batch file. If the deploy option, you do something like run TagUI just to generate the script, and then you quit instead of running it. Then check whether it's a Chrome option. So starting with version 6, the default is Chrome. Previously, user need to type Chrome to start Chrome engine. Yeah, and without Chrome option, you will run the Phantomjs browser. And why we switch to version 6 to be Chrome is because that seems to be a default option by people already. But that's gonna break barrel compatibility, right? That's why we jump a version from 5 to 6. Usually, when there's a new release that is likely to break users' existing script and barrel compatibility, right, you have to jump a major version. Yeah, that's a so-called the general principle lah. Yeah, you write software and you gotta introduce some changes that you know for sure is gonna break some users' code, right? It's better to market it, release it as a new major release, and you include it in the notes. It's gonna, these are the things that will change. Yeah, if you are using it now, you will have to you know, if let's say a user was previously running with Phantomjs mode without option, right? Then here they actually need to run with no browser to get the same effect. Otherwise, you'll launch Chrome and do something. Right? So these are things that will be different. That's why version 6 introduced. But since version 6 was introduced, was it a couple of years back, there hasn't been a need for a backward compatibility breaking change. That's why now we're still at version 6.108. You know, each time there's a small change, I increment that intermediate version, the minor version. In the future, there might be to make a change that is breaking user code. Then we jump to version 7, but until now don't have, so there's no need to lah.
Okay.
Of course, this is in terms of software engineering practice lah. If you are talking about marketing, right, it's a different story. You know, some people, for marketing, maybe you want to bump to version 7, version 8, because it shows that there's a lot that's being done. A lot of change has happened. That's for marketing lah. But for in terms of compatibility perspective, right, version 108 is as compatible in version 6.0. Yeah. So yeah, like for example, Samsung, you got S10, right? Then for marketing reason, they jump to S20. So iPhone become iPhone 11, right? So Samsung want to overtake that. Okay, hey, let's go and jump straight to S20. You know, that's purely marketing, right? It's nothing to, I mean, how can you jump from 10 to 20? No, it's for marketing reason. Yeah.
True.
Then you check for things like whether the Chrome browser flag. You check for things like whether there's a, for each option, right, there's a full option, there's a shortcut of the option, which is one letter for convenience. So you check both things. And right now, I haven't even halfway through this entry point, you know, we haven't even talked about passing the human language part yet. So it's a lot of work behind the scenes. It's just that it's transparent to users lah, but it's necessary. All this happen to achieve this outcome lah that we want. So we check whether it's Microsoft Edge. Check whether it's headless option. Headless means you run Chrome in the invisible mode. You don't see Chrome running. you'll see a web page.
I think you gave users too many options. You should like say there's 9 arguments. Then if they don't want to use, then they should like type something dummy. But then you can just stick to like the first argument is what.
Oh, dummy, yeah.
Yeah, so it's like the first one is headless and second one is like no browser. Then it goes down the line, but if you don't want to use it, then you can just type something else. Like, I don't know. I feel that one might be easier to control how users use it.
Yeah, but that one is not the standard practice for CLI tools. CLI tools usually the order of the parameters, right, can be intermixed one, usually. And if you are not using a parameter, right, the standard norm is it's okay not to include rather than having a dummy placeholder. So
that's true.
So because of that, I try to, okay, the good thing about following existing norm is that let's say you're a totally new user, to get to know to use your tool, there's always a gap in terms of the new knowledge you need to acquire. So by designing your app to something that users are likely to be more familiar with, right, you reduce that knowledge gap. So the user can get productive very quickly without investing a lot of time to close that gap. So for example, let's say we introduce a way where the parameter are always in a strict order, and people don't want to use the option, they use a dummy. In that case, right, the knowledge gap will be higher because users got to learn something new. Of course, this doesn't apply if it's a totally new user. I know nothing, so for me to learn this way or that way is no difference. But to the existing pool of users who are familiar with CLI tools, right, then there will be a reduction in gap if we do it using the established norm lah.
Okay, true.
Not to say the established norm is right. A lot of time established norm is not ideal, not efficient, but because of legacy reasons, it's there. So yeah, I'm sure in our Chinese traditions and various customs, right, there are things that doesn't make sense anymore, but we still do it because it's a legacy, it's tradition, So for us to change it, there's a cost to it. Yeah, there's a pushback also to it sometimes. Okay.
True.
Yeah, not say it's good or bad lah. It's just that some things are there because of the way things evolve organically in the past, and a lot of it's a lot of the time doesn't make sense, but the cost to change it and handle the pushback may be too much for people to try to change those norms. Yeah, imagine all the documentation that has been in place for all these standards, right? Then suddenly we do something totally new. It will be harder to proliferate. Yeah. Okay, there's also a test option. The test option and the debug option. Okay, so when just now was a Firefox option. So the debug option, what happens is it's also not published. Basically, it publishes details of the Phantomjs log, which is pretty useless because now the primary usage is automating Chrome. So the log from Phantomjs NG is not meaningful anymore. So that's why I removed, but I still keep it there in case for backward compatibility. Then you have a test option where you run a TagUI workflow for test automation. Let me show you. You may not have come across this before. So I go to the Chrome example. Then I run the test option. So everything is the same except the output is designed for testing. After you run, you know why. You see. Okay, the same automation is running, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And the only difference is the output is designed for test automation. It has some syntax highlighting and coloring for different parts. And then you have an output log file that you can feed into test automation reporting frameworks. Okay, you show how long the test suite run, how much time it's taken, how many pass, how many fail. Yeah. So this was an option added early on in 2017, but I removed it from the default options in the documentation because decided to focus more on the RPA use case rather than test automation use case. There are so many established open source library for test automation that there's no point to compete with those tools. Yeah. And I give you an example. Let's say Robot Framework. Robot Framework is for test automation, and RobotCop builds on Robot Framework. So can you see that although both are trying to automate front end of application, the test automation user needs and the RPA user needs are quite different. So if you try to take RobotCop to adapt it to use for RPA, it's gonna be quite tricky because it's hard for RobotCop to evolve to serve RPA users' needs. Yeah, because if you do so right, it usually and likely will come at the expense of its primary user base, which is test automation users. But if you don't evolve to meet the needs of RPA users, then you also have a problem. If you claim that you are framework for test automation RobotCop, but you actually RPA user is second-class citizen, right? Over time, it will show up in the usability, and that's bad lah. So right from the get-go, I know that there's I believe it's an issue that RobotCop team will face. They are using a framework which in its core is designed for test automation. And what they are doing is to develop a lot of modules for RPA that exist outside of RobotCop. Yeah, so that's a good strategy, and I hope that works because to have more options in the market is definitely something good for the users in the RPA space. Okay. So yeah, RPA framework. This one. So they built an RPA framework based on robot framework. RPA framework. Yeah. So they build their own different libraries for RPA. The core is robot framework lah. Yeah. Not RobotCop. They are the most well-funded RPA startup for open source. I think 26 million USD so far. So in terms of team size and pocket size, they are the largest. OpenBots raised about 5 million. The other players like OpenRPA, I don't think Alan has raised any money. Alan from Denmark. Of course, TagUI, we are not going by the VC route. Okay, so Coil Mode report. Yeah, so if you run with report option, you'll generate a reporting file. Okay, we scroll down, speed mode. You run with speed mode, then you modify the certain code in the code base to run it faster. Oh, sorry, turbo mode. Speed mode deprecated already. Speed mode last time is between iterations, you will do a 3-second wait. Yeah, if you have speed mode, it doesn't wait for the 3 seconds. Right now, the default for data table iteration is it will always wait 3 seconds by default. Sometimes there's a mechanism like this that's designed in and built into the tool because we make decisions for the users if we know a domain well enough. And the reason is, let's say you have a data table of 100 records, you want to automate data scraping from LinkedIn. If you don't add in the delay of 3 seconds between each iteration, right? You very quickly will exceed the rate limit of a website, and then you get the user into trouble for using your tool. So so in a sense, we are trying to protect the users for their own good. But of course, they can choose to override it by changing how the code works. That's okay, yeah. Okay, so after sorting out all the options, you initialize some of the files. These are important because what I did is to use all these files for the respective integration to detect whether workflow requires all this integration. So basically delete all these files first for R, Python, Schooling integration. And then as you pass through the TagUI code, if there's a need for those integration, right, you create a dummy file for this. Yeah, and then later part of this batch script, if you detect those files exist, it means that you need to launch those backend processes. Because here I already deleted so if they exist later part of this file, right, it means I need to launch those integrations. Okay, and check for whether user provide a data table, and the data table structure is actually not the way TagUI natively handles it in memory. So a data table looks like this. So maybe a serial number, name, country. Okay, so you have 1, 2, 3. Let's say you have 3 records. Alan, Denmark, Betty, Belarus, Candy, Canada. Okay, so let's say you have a data table like that, right? For TagUI in the memory, right, the structure is actually not stored like that. This structure is not good for making the inferencing of the value. The structure is actually a transposed version of that. Let me show you what I mean. So it's actually something like this. Okay, so the actual structure of data table is like this. So before TagUI even runs, right, I write the code to do the transposition to convert this structure into this structure. And once you are in this structure, right, it's very easy to match the keyword. Let's say a user use echo name, for example, echo name, as part of their workflow. So in this structure, it's so much easier to match this name to or Alan, Betty, or Candy, depending on which iteration you are. Versus in this structure, you want to match this to here is actually very hard. Yeah, so that's the reason there's a need to do the transpose. And also this is for data table, and for object repository, right? Actually, you realize that the structure for object repository is also like that. You have a value, you have you have a definition, you have a key, then you have a value, you have a key, you have a value. The structure of the object repository also like that. It's just that object repository is only 2 columns, the key and the value, whereas data table has more column for different iteration. Yeah, so the structure like this makes it easy to deal with the data table, and also reduce redundancy in the code compared to object repository, versus, right, you write another set of code to process the data table in this structure. Yeah, so it's easier to transpose it and use the existing code from object repository to do this. Yeah. So that's done here. Then here is checking for data table, and when you check data table, there are certain lines to check and count how many lines there is in the table, so that you will do a big for loop through the data table. Yeah, you see here is a big for loop. So imagine you have 100 lines of TagUI in the data table, TagUI records. What you do is do a big for loop to pass TagUI source code 100 times and run it based on the 100 set of data. Sorry, the 100 rows of data. Which means, let's say you have 100 runs, right? Any of the run fail, it means the other runs are not affected, correct, right? Because it exists independently. Yeah, so you do all the processing and call the Phantomjs, Casperjs executable to run. So whether the earlier run fail or not doesn't matter, it will not be affected. You only be affected if user control break to kill this whole this automation otherwise it will not be affected. And I chose that model because if you have a long running record, let's say for 10 hours, if you don't run each record as a fresh instance, right, you might run into problem with the memory issues and garbage in the memory. So it's less reliable, but it's better to run slower and more reliable. So that's why I queue everything and run again. So this one is an API step. So if a workflow has an API step inside, right, you'll run TagUI with Phantomjs web security force. This is to make cross-domain function calls. What it means is, let's say you go to website A and you want to do an API call to another endpoint, right? By right, that's block 1 by default by Phantomjs JavaScript engine, because it doesn't make sense. Like you go to Google, automate something in Google, suddenly you do an API call to let's say Amazon Web Service. So that might be a security breach. That's why by default it's not enabled. But if you're using API call, there's a need to enable that. Yeah. R integration process, Python integration process, Schoolie integration process. Yeah. So this one we can cover. The detailed integration we cover in the next section. But basically for each integration, right, I have to write the corresponding engine in their own language to so copy the receiver. So TagUI will send instructions, send, then the receiver will receive the instruction and act, and then return the response back to TagUI with the result, and then you keep repeating until the automation completes. And when TagUI send, right, you send the instruction with a unique running number. Instruction 1, instruction 2, instruction 3, instruction 4. And then the receiver from, let's say, Python or Schoolie, you will check, the instruction 1, okay, let's look out for instruction 2, let's look out for instruction 3, then return back. So there's a consistent chronological order, which the instructions is taken, executed, and responded back. So you will make sure that everything happens synchronously in the sequence, which is important for RPA. RPA, let's say you have a few steps, go to a web page, log in, go to a web page, key in your username, password, and log in. By doing the steps in the wrong order, right, you will not work because the UI is not designed to handle. You don't click the login button before you type in the name. You don't go and type in the name before you go to a web page. There's nothing to type in, So it has to, broadly speaking, happen in a sequence for RPA.
That's for web automation.
Yes. For desktop automation, the sequence is still relatively important. Let's say you open a CRM app, right? You want to search for a customer record, then you load and then you edit. So it doesn't make sense to type into a customer record before it's even loaded. It has nothing to type into also. Yeah. So usually RPA processes is linear. Linear in the sense is in sequential order. In between there may be condition that branches off and back, but largely speaking, it's in a sequence. You don't run RPA processes asynchronously in parallel, right? All the steps in parallel. It just can't happen that way. Yeah, human, because largely it's designed for humans, mimic humans action. We use a web page, we use a desktop app, we do all the steps in sequence, but we don't randomly jump over the different steps. Yeah. Largely speaking, but there's a situation where doing certain steps first or certain steps later has no difference.
Okay.
Yeah, for example, you have automation to say, I want to click the first 5 checkbox on the page and the last 5 checkbox on the page. So those are maybe 10 instructions. So whether you do the first 5 instructions first or the last 5 instructions first, it's still the same because you are not hitting the submit button before that. Right. So in this case, yes, the order doesn't matter for that part because whichever you do is flexible. Yeah. But in other case, the order you should do is quite important. Like you submit a claim. Obviously, you can't click submit before keying in the dollar amount of the claim. You got to key in all the transport claim, whatever, then you click submit. So in that case, the submit button, right, has to be always after all the steps to fill out the form. Yeah, but for filling up the form, let's say there are 10 fields, right? The order which is being filled up, it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
Okay, so then this part is for starting the Chrome process. Don't be don't be traumatized to look at the code here, because what's important is to know where to find what. Yeah, so now I'm running through the sequence as a TagUI run, what happens, so that you get an understanding of when you type TagUI command, what happened in the back end. But all this command, if you never write bash files before, Linux bash scripting before, you won't know this, but it's okay. You just need to know where to find what. And I add a lot of comments. You see, I very liberal with comments on. Yeah. I tend to over comment then under comment. Yeah.
Okay.
Because you add additional comment that's not needed, people can just ignore.
Mm.
But if you never comment, right, even with myself, I come back to look at this 5 years later, I won't even know what this part is trying to do, right? I mean, I write it 5 years ago. Last time I used to drink, sometimes I have a few cans of beer, then I code through the night, right? So I don't even remember what I do, right? So with the comment, it will help me to remember. Yeah, sometimes I actually can be quite productive after I go to some clubbing, have some drinks and come back, I kind of sleep. Then I code through a new section of code. Yeah, of course, next day I'll test lah. But I sometimes wrote those code not in a perfectly conscious state lah. So this part of code try to check whether you're running Edge. If you are running Edge, you try to do some setting to change the command to Microsoft Edge lah. That's all. Do some error checking whether the command can be found. If not, you give error message. This part is important to emphasize. When you design software, right, it's important to create error message that are actionable by users themselves. Because if you do that, right, you cut down the support requests that's coming in, which users can troubleshoot and find solution themselves. And when you do that, you reserve more time left for actually improving the tool versus doing something which users can solve themselves quickly. Yeah. So here I say, hey, cannot find your browser at this location. So say, hey, your browser is at a non-standard location. Please raise an issue here. So in this case, our user know where to solve the problem. They'll raise the issue here. Then they'll tell us the error, and they'll tell us where is the location. The user will tell us where's the location. Then we'll just add in the new location. By right, there's only these two locations. From what we know, the standard practice of default installation, either at the program file or the local app data folder. So it's suddenly, or this one x68. So if there's suddenly a fourth location that appears, then we just add in the code here, that's all. Yeah.
Okay.
But so far nobody has raised it. This is for future proving as all. The whole chunk of code we remove, right? Like 99% of users should have no problem. Yeah. But this is future proof, like 1 year down the road, maybe Chrome decide to install somewhere, maybe Edge decide to be installed somewhere, then this one will break, and then they'll get this error, then they'll tell us. Then we just add one more block of code here, then that will fix it. Yeah. And the order which we check this would be important. Yeah. Because we want to prioritize on the one that we think is the most commonly used one, so that when it's found, we don't check the rest already. Yeah. So this order will be also important. So with Edge, you go and queue all the processes that sounds like Edge. If it's Chrome, you go and queue all the processes first. And after queuing them, you start the Chrome process with a TagUI custom user profile. Then over here, it keeps waiting until the Chrome process has launched and ready to accept instructions from TagUI. So sometimes you hear user, once in a while, a user raise issue, hey, I run TagUI command, it just hangs there. Then this is usually a place to look at, because this is the part in TagUI code during initialization where it can hang. This is an infinite loop, as you can see. Means that it will not exit this loop. You see, you see, this one is like checking whether the WebSocket connection for Chrome is ready. If it's not ready, I go to scan WebSocket again. So here, if Chrome somehow is blocked from receiving instruction for TagUI, it will hang here forever.
Okay.
Yeah, it will not progress. It will just hang here. And user will either restart their computer, control break, control C or whatever. Then they'll tell you the problem. So this is a part that can be a problem. And why we never design with a timeout or what is because this is the most fundamental thing that you're supposed to have. You don't have Chrome, if you have Chrome, which in the earlier part already did the validation. If you're a Chrome and you cannot connect to Chrome, then something is wrong. And most likely it's the user IT policy that is blocking Chrome from being automated. So you can tell user to, let's say, double check the IT policy, whether something is blocking. Invite them to the Zoom call to dig further. But most likely it's due to the IT policy don't allow their Chrome to be automated. They don't allow the Chrome to have an active WebSocket connection that TagUI can connect to. So you'll hang here.
Error message that comes out
when this happens, there's no error message. It just hangs there. It just.
But there could be other reasons that it hangs over, right?
From what I understand, this is the only main reason, because the other part of the code doesn't have a infinite for loop, infinite loop. For other errors, right, you either throw an error, break halfway, go back to command prompt or whatever else. But this is a part that is silently fail. Yeah.
Okay, can.
I don't think it even say message like automation start. I don't think so. Yeah. So it just silently fail and just hangs there. Yeah. So, but this is rarely happen. So that's why we also don't. I mean, if we try to design something here, right, it will affect the 99.9% of the user that doesn't have the problem. So also not that good idea to do something here, lah. Yeah. So I will never add. Yeah. So after it's available and connected, great. Then we go and connect. We go and start the Chrome browser engine to connect to that WebSocket connection. Okay, and this part also need to write the code to do that, lah. That means having an engine for receiving command from TagUI. Yeah. And now going back to what I covered earlier, the different languages, and that's precisely the reason why there are so many languages, because you need a PHP to do the passing from human language to JavaScript. You need a JavaScript code to actually run those functions in Phantomjs JS engine. Then you need the batch file to run what I showed you. All these are batch file, the Windows batch file. Then you need the bash shell file to run for Mac and Linux. Then you need the C# because of Ruth's Microsoft Office plugins. Then you need a Python code to run the Python integration and the Schooly X integration. Yeah, I think there's also R code, but I think it's so small, it's not even listed here. Yeah. So after launching Chrome, this is the actual command here that starts the execution of the RPA. So just now we saw the generated, okay, this one no need already. So we saw this generated JavaScript file. So this is the actual command that called Casperjs, which is running Phantomjs in the back end to run this whole file. Yeah.
Okay.
And then T is a command that capture whatever is shown to the screen and output it to a log file. That's all. So we want to capture the log. That's why we use a T command. Yeah. And this is checking for test mode because the parameter to launch the test mode is slightly different. Yeah, but it's not a publish option now. It's a hidden option. So for legacy reason, that's why this part is still here. Okay. Then so now it tries to okay, after running, right, it sends the finished signal to the integration. So when you have the finished signal, the different integration will detect and then queue themselves and exit themselves. Yeah. Then other things like end process, there's an end process command to try to queue existing process. So you're running batch automation, it will detect for this signal file to quit the automation, the batch automation. Otherwise, right, you have let's say 100 record and you try to run end process, you queue your 10th record, but then you continue from 11 record onwards. So the TagUI process is still running. But by having this signal file from the end processor's command, created for TagUI, you force it to end. Yeah. Then do some housekeeping like cleaning up any dead Chrome processes. So not any dead, is intentionally killing the Chrome process. Yeah. Because there is a command you can send to Chrome for TagUI to kill itself. So there isn't a way to do that. So the way to do is actually get the process ID from a Windows command, and once you get the process ID, you kill it by force. Yeah. And some other housekeeping, like you convert the log file to Windows readable file. By default, the log file is a Linux and Mac version, which means if you open Notepad, everything is in one line. In Mac and Linux, the \n is a thing for a new line, but in Windows is \r/n. So when you open a DOS-based file, sorry, you open a Linux and the Mac-based file of Windows, right? Everything is in one line because there isn't a \r. So this part here converts all the log file and the generated files to have the \r. Yeah, and how do I even get that? I do it through Google. I find what's the syntax to do it and I test it to make sure it works and add it in. Yeah.
Okay, can.
Yeah, all these are from Googling, and check whether there's report option to do what's needed, and do some cleaning up of the unnecessary log file if TagUI logging doesn't exist. Yeah. So by default, you delete all the intermediate log files. Then here, clean up because you're killing Chrome forcefully, right? There's a need to clean up some of the Chrome settings so that it will not show the Chrome has accidentally been killed, but the next time it runs. So in order to override that, there's a need to hack some of the Chrome configuration so that the Chrome will think that it exited cleanly and not accidentally got killed. Yeah, but the reality, we are actually killing it. Yeah. So change back to the initial directory, some more cleaning up. Yeah. So initial directory is, so let's say just now I run TagUI from my desktop folder. What it does is at the start, you keep a record what is the original folder, but you change directory to the TagUI source folder to run everything because all the files that's needed to run is here. So for ease of limiting complication due to the file missing, file path issues, file name with spaces, file path with spaces, I changed to that TagUI source directory before running everything. But after running everything, we go back to the initial directory so user won't be confused. How come I run the TagUI command here at desktop folder? After running, suddenly I add some other folder. It's not a standard practice. It's better to return back to the initial user folder. That's why there's this cleaning up here going on. Okay. So what we cover is the overall picture on this. So when you call a command, you pass it to do all this. But what we haven't covered is the specifics of the integration and the passing itself, and the functions within the JavaScript code that be sent to Phantomjs and Casperjs. So what we haven't covered is that portion. So this would be a good overview of what happens. So what we'll cover next later at 1:30, we'll go through this part here. Okay, so you see, so just now we cover here, this command runs a JavaScript file, right? But before running the JavaScript file, it has to create, right? So where's the part that create? You'll be here. So TagUI pass. So it'll be here. You actually, in the big for loop, you call the TagUI pass command to pass the human language file into a JavaScript file. Then after that's done, do all the other prep work, then call the Casperjs command to run it. Yeah. So now I will give a quick run through for the Mac version so that you guys is just aware. But essentially the code is like exactly the same. Even the command, I also keep it to be exactly the same. Yeah. Okay, so on the Mac version, everything is the same, except is the syntax is just for Mac, that's all, for Linux bash scripting. The order of the things are being done, the checking of options, everything is the same. Yeah. So it's the same order as the Windows one. I'm primarily a Mac user, so whenever I add new code, new option, I always create on the Mac first. Then I migrate the code to Windows batch file. Yeah. So all these are the same. And you don't have to understand this or memorize this. When the time comes to, you can just Google the syntax for bash scripting. Bash as in BASH. So when you search how to do a if in bash scripting, for example, how to do if in bash script, then you get an answer.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, like that.
So
then you see, oh, a if statement, you can have various options, and then how you can structure it. Yeah, and then you see all these different things you will come out already. Yeah. No, /f means you check whether the file exists. Yeah, and when you put a exclamation mark in front, you check whether the file don't exist or not. They'll do something. Then there's a need to do a then statement. And then there's a need to do an end if. In Windows one, don't need for that. So if you put on different line, it'll be something like that. You don't need a quotation mark. The semi-quote, right, is needed. Semicolon is needed if you want to combine multiple lines into one line. So if you don't, it'll be something like that. Yeah, or like that. That's fine. Yeah. So I combine so that it's easier to see on the small screen. Yeah, and don't need to keep scrolling left and right. Yeah. So it's the same order, and the difference will be like on Windows and Mac, of course, and Linux, the place you look for Chrome, of course, the place will be different. So the path are mapped accordingly for Mac and Linux versus yeah, you see, Mac is like that. It's always standard one. It's this path one. See, so iOS, yeah, Chrome is there one. It's just the standard practice is there. But I do also have error checking. In case it's not there, you show error message. Please report to tell us. I think I say your Chrome is installed at a non-standard location on Mac. Can you raise the issue to tell us more? For example, there here, like that. So we can so-called close the feedback loop very quickly from an error. Very quickly, when a user has error, it either know how to solve it with a actionable error message. If not, they know where to raise the issue, so they tell us quickly, so we quickly can fix it and release the update. Yeah. So if we try to keep this iteration loop tight and short and fast, right? Then even if we are on the behind our competitor, very fast we can overtake them because we iterate at a much faster pace than them. So that's very important. So same thing, there's an infinite loop here. Yeah, while true. While true means you never exit the loop. So you only exit when you break, when you found that, oh, there's a WebSocket being opened up by Chrome. So it's time to break and then connect to Chrome.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is part again where it can hang lah. But so far I haven't seen users reporting that for Mac and Linux. Yeah, usually it's some enterprise Windows user, the policy block, then it will happen. Yeah. Yeah, the rest are same lah. Then there's some standard stuff like you return error code if there's error lah. Like you have error during passing, you have error during running. Then you just return the error code 1. Otherwise, return error code 0. This is irrelevant for most users because they are unlikely to do further automation and chaining different TagUI execution. But for more advanced users, if they try to chain different things together, right, this error code is important. So their bigger automation engine will know whether something has run successfully or not.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think we covered the good decent amount. before we break for lunch, any questions on what I covered this morning?
No,
Okay.
I'll dig the code when the time.
Okay.
The other time I dug one, that was when I think there was some Excel thing, right? Then we found out that there was a difference in the way Excel values are shown and received or something. Yeah, then that's when I first, the only time I dug. And I also just see, then I just Google and fix the thing, then okay, it works.
You see, yeah. So I think that time you're digging TagUI pass. It should
Yeah,
be
correct.
pass. Yeah, I think around
The
the
Excel
TagUI pass.
function.
Yeah, TagUI pass or TagUI header. Yeah. So, yeah. So far we haven't covered TagUI pass and header. Those would be the bulk of the logic
They
lah
convert
behind
out the
TagUI.
code. Yeah.
Yeah, this part is the part that's the entry point, which is important because if you are going to
Mm.
do any tracing, right, this here will be one of the first thing you want to check to see whether the error happens on the option level or the passing level. Let's say from the error message, you know for sure it's something to do with the passing, then you straight away go check TagUI pass. But it's something to do with the options being interpreted wrongly, so on, then you have to check here lah. Yeah. Most of the time, issues don't happen here. This is just the entry point. The things that are checked here are pretty standard. So it's unlikely to have problems. Reported problem usually happen on the passing side. Yeah.
I can't believe you use like Vim to code.
Yeah, I developed the guy on Vim.
My brain cannot.
Oh, actually for TagUI, the initial code base I did right was on Vim, but on my web server. So it's actually more colorful.
Oh wow. I think that's even worse actually.
Really?
I think the colors are strange.
Okay. So
Or maybe the background is white, maybe that's why. I don't know.
okay. So for TagUI, right, when I created it, I always make any change on my web server. But it's only the last couple of years I don't know what changed there. I think I got quite comfortable with the code base that all this coloring are not important to me anymore lah. It's like whether got this color or not, I think it's negligible when I change things. But initially when I start learning JavaScript, PHP, whatever, right, all these are useful. It can help me catch typo very easily, the color coding. Let's say you have a bracket that's not closed properly, right? I think they will have some highlighting. You see? No? You close properly, you show whether you have an extra bracket or not. Yeah, all these are useful, but now not so useful for me. So the overhead of typing an old command to go to the web server versus editing locally, right, is lesser lah. The overhead is not worth it. And my GitHub connection is from my desktop also. So if I need to commit code, right? If I do it on web server, later on I need to copy it locally to commit to the GitHub also. Yeah. I didn't set up to commit from my web server. Yeah, but you can set up that way also, but I didn't. Yeah. And later on, yeah, it's just not much gain for me to do there. But initially, yes, it's developed on Vim on my web server. Then later on, it's also developed on Vim the last few years on my MacBook. Yeah. And Vim is a slightly higher learning curve than VS Code. But if you master it, it can be very productive because you don't have to keep moving your right hand to touch the mouse to move to different place. Your two hands are on the keyboard all the time. For your right hand to move to the mouse and back, right? Like hundreds of times or thousands of times in the course of a week is actually overheads. Yeah. So if you don't have to do that, you can save a lot of time and write more code in less time. Even by VS Code, right, I installed the Vim extension. So my VS Code, the navigation is actually Vim navigation. You see, so if I choose a new file, Okay, so it's a new file. Right, so all these are Vim command. Let's say I have many lines, right? At the first line, right, I can straight away jump to the last line, with a shortcut. I can straight away jump to the 12th line with a shortcut. You see? So all this can be do in Vim. Then let's say I have a long line of code. Right. Some super long line. I can straight away jump to the end of the line with a shortcut. And join the beginning of the line with a shortcut without moving the mouse at all, without putting my hands to the mouse to click and then type. There's a lot of overhead. With Vim, you skip all this overhead. You can jump to the next word very easily with a shortcut. Go to the previous word very easily with a shortcut. Yeah.
But what if you memorize the...
Yeah, but then after you use it for a while, right, you actually don't need to memorize. It becomes part of your muscle memory. Like you learn to swim, you learn to cycle, right? After you get familiar, you don't actually try to rehearse a step, how to cycle, how to swim. It becomes part of your muscle memory.
That's true.
Yeah, but the initial overhead is there lah. Yeah, but anyway, I learned to use Vim not because I gung ho or what, but many years ago in my job, I was a technical consultant. I go to customer sites to install and set up their ERP on Linux and Sun Solaris. So on those OS, right, you don't have a GUI one. The only editor you have is Vim.
Okay, got it.
So I'm forced to learn Vim to do my job.
Right. No wonder.
So yes, so fast forward from there, since I know it, right, then I might as well continue to use it. I find it quite productive. And I was paid to learn how to use Vim. There's no other editor. I don't have there's no such thing as Notepad++ or what on the Linux server. The only thing you have is the terminal.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the rationale why I develop on Vim. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So okay. How about Kelly? Do you have any questions for this morning one?
No, none.
Okay. All right, then I'll see you guys at 1:30.
Yes, 1:30.
Yeah, we probably can do a good almost 2 hours. Then we see how far we can do. Then we go for the subsequent ones in the subsequent weeks lah.
You can.
Okay. All right. Okay, see you guys later. I'll stop recording now. At the end of the sessions, right? I don't have an official YouTube account to post, so I just post to my Google Drive also okay, but I was thinking to post to my own YouTube lor. Then I can maybe link from documentation lah for people who want to maintain their own fork of TagUI. Yeah, but in the future, when TagUI become a foundation and let's say TagUI has its own home page, right, or home YouTube channel, then just move everything there. Yeah. Yeah. For now, you see my YouTube. I think I only have one video. Yeah, my YouTube has only one video, the TagUI technical webinar a few months back. All the other video don't have already, not relevant. So I will just maybe add 2 more. The one for technical, maintainer training part 1, maintainer training part 2, and then if needed part 3 and part 4 lah. Yeah.
Okay, Ken. Thank you.
Okay, all right. See you guys later.